I thank the chair of the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls. And now I invite the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, its Causes and Consequences, Ms. Reem Alsalem. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to address you here today. I started my second term as Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls feeling profoundly concerned about the situation of women and girls around the globe. Globally, any advances that we may have seen, such as the increased economic empowerment of women and their increased political participation, has been offset by other alarming developments. These have affected hard-won rights, including, as we have seen in Afghanistan, the right for women and girls just to exist. Nothing exemplifies the serious regressions in upholding the rights and protections of women and girls as those we have seen in times of conflict. International humanitarian law appears to be facing its most existential crisis since World War II, affecting thousands of civilians, including women and girls, in blatant disregard for their protections they enjoy and the principles of proportionality and distinction. Women and girls in conflict have been subjected to the most atrocious war crimes and crimes against humanity, and which have included sexual and reproductive violence in many places around the world as tools of war, and as we have seen in Palestine, extreme dehumanization, ethnic cleansing, and an unfolding genocide. We have all become acutely aware of how artificial intelligence and digital technology has been weaponized against women and girls in times of peace and war. In a recent report to the Human Rights Council, I have spoken about the direct link between the consumption of pornography and prostitution on one hand and violence against women and girls on the other, including rape and femicide. I have also shown how we will not achieve a society where there's gender equality if we normalize the sale of women and children, including girls, as well as the buying of sexual acts overall. Equally concerning is the continued push in some countries to erase women as a specific group in society, to erase women and women-specific words and terminology from language, and to erase the way in which being female impacts their lives and shapes their experiences, including experiences of discrimination and violence. Policies and legislations cannot continue to ignore and sideline the centrality of sex as a key factor in which women and girls are discriminated against and deny women single-sex spaces where they are necessary, proportionate, and legitimate to the objectives of upholding their safety and dignity. Governments and local authorities must also continue to adequately resource institutions, policies, and civil society organizations dedicated to ending violence against women and girls. Let's just be clear that women and girls are not waiting for governments and others to give them the rightful seat at the table and hand them over their rights. They are mobilizing, they are organizing, speaking, and writing, often at great personal risk. Rather than facilitate and support their full participation, however, women have been punished and excluded from key processes. Some parliaments have even fast-tracked legislation with profound harmful consequences for women and girls. The challenges are enormous, and no country has gotten it right. However, the 69th session of the Commission on the Status of Women next year is a crucial opportunity to reform the global architecture and frameworks for ending violence against women and girls. We must revitalize the Commission on the Status of Women to make it more operational and connected to grassroots women's movement. We must also use this opportunity to review our collective implementation of plans and standards with their achievements, with their failings, and to be bold and principled. I sincerely hope that as part of such soul-searching exercise, we will be taken to recognize the value of adopting an optional dedicated protocol to the CEDAW Convention on Ending Violence Against Women, a proposal I and other predecessors of mine strongly support. Madam Chair, distinguished delegates, today I present to you also my report on violence against women and girls in sport. Violence against women and girls in sport is not only pervasive, but systematic, driven by male-dominated cultures, harmful stereotypes, and a lack of investment in women's sport. From psychological to economic and physical abuse, women and girls face multiple forms of violence exacerbated by intersecting discrimination based on sex, gender, age, race, and disability. In my report, I have emphasized the structural barriers that limit women's and girls' ability to engage in sports with dignity, safety, and fairness. Unequal access to resources, unequal pay, the burden of caregiving, and underrepresentation in leadership positions are just a few examples of the hurdles they face. Moreover, the increased intrusion of male individuals in female-only sports further erodes the integrity and safety of women and girls' sports. Impunity for perpetrators of violence remains widespread, fostering a culture of silence and injustice, facilitated in part by the autonomous and self-contained modus operandi of regulatory frameworks of sports organizations and bodies, which often prioritize reputation and winning over justice for victims. In addition to the political will, sports organizations are often not equipped with resources, expertise, and structures to prevent violence or respond to the needs of survivors and their families. It is imperative that states, sports bodies, the media, and all relevant actors in society take urgent action to uphold the protection of all women and girls, including in sports. Sports cannot continue to be an avenue where the record of states committing egregious human rights violations, including against women and girls, can be laundered. I'm therefore calling for barring the participation of national teams of these states and avoiding double standards in the approach by international sporting bodies. Furthermore, relevant actors must ensure robust protection, accountability, and fair conditions for women and girls in sport, not only by eliminating violence, but by creating environments where they can thrive and practice sports. Unless sports-related actors commit to making sports safer and fairer for women and girls, societies will not be able to fully capitalize on its potential as an avenue for driving the much-needed social change needed to achieve sex and gender equality and empower all women and girls. I remain ready to support governments and other stakeholders in implementing these recommendations, and I thank you for your attention.
I thank the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, its causes and consequences. I will now open the floor for questions and comments on the three presentations just heard. As per best practice, I would like the delegations to limit their comments to 3 minutes. I thank for your kind consideration. I now give the floor to France, to be followed by Switzerland and Kingdom of Netherlands. France, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je voudrais vous remercier les deux présidentes et la rapporteuse spéciale. Cette question de l'égalité entre les hommes et les femmes est essentielle pour le développement des sociétés pacifiques et durables, tant d'ailleurs dans le domaine de la sphère publique que privée. Je voudrais en particulier apporter ma chaleureuse approbation au projet de recommandation générale numéro 40 du comité CEDAW qui porte sur la représentation égale et inclusive des femmes dans les processus de décision. Cela constitue une avancée remarquable qui mérite tout notre soutien et on sait combien ce sujet est au cœur de nos démocraties. Deuxième remarque, je voudrais ici plaider pour la diplomatie féministe. La France plaide naturellement pour la défense des droits des femmes et des filles partout dans le monde. Aucun contexte politique, aucun contexte économique ou environnemental ou de crise ne doit jamais justifier des atteintes aux droits des femmes et des filles. Troisième remarque, à propos des outils numériques émergents. Ils offrent, on le sait, beaucoup d'opportunités, mais c'est aussi des risques de violence et de discrimination. C'est pourquoi la France présente cette année, aux côtés des Pays-Bas, un projet de résolution visant à éliminer la violence à l'égard des femmes et des filles dans l'environnement numérique. Et c'est donc tout naturellement que j'en viens à ma question posée à la présidente du CEDAW, mais que peut-être les autres intervenantes aussi peuvent avoir en tête, c'est comment leurs travaux peuvent-ils nous permettre de nous positionner pour répondre à cette question de la violence à l'égard des femmes et des filles dans l'environnement numérique. Merci.
Thank you, France. Switzerland, you have the floor.
Monsieur le Président, nous remercions la rapporteure spéciale et les présidents du comité et du groupe de travail pour leurs interventions. La Suisse constate avec préoccupation que toutes les crises politiques, sanitaires, économiques, environnementales et humanitaires continuent d'avoir un impact disproportionné sur les femmes et les filles. Alors que la Convention CEDEF fête ses 45 ans cette année, le nombre de violations et abus de droits humains des femmes et filles dans le monde entier est dramatique. La mise en œuvre de la Convention CEDEF par toutes les États parties est essentielle. Le travail du comité CEDEF est donc plus nécessaire que jamais. La Suisse salue l'élection de la Suissesse Erika Schleppi au comité. Elle soutient aussi l'élaboration de la recommandation générale 40 sur la représentation égale et inclusive des femmes dans les systèmes de prise de décision. Mesdames les expertes, que peuvent faire les États pour renforcer la représentation égale et inclusive des femmes dans les parlements? Enfin, la Suisse s'engage aussi pour la promotion des droits des femmes et des filles dans toute leur diversité dans le monde du sport. La Suisse est membre fondatrice du Centre pour le sport et les droits de l'homme, basé à Genève. Celui-ci s'engage à lutter contre l'impunité des abus commis dans le monde du sport et à renforcer l'accès des victimes et des survivantes et survivants à des mécanismes de recours. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Switzerland, now I give the floor to Netherlands, followed by the United States and Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mrs. President, and also thank you to the special rapporteurs for their briefings. I would like to address my intervention specifically to their special rapporteur on violence against women, while thanking her for a report on violence against women and girls in sports. The Kingdom of the Netherlands is committed to the elimination of sexual and gender-based violence everywhere it occurs. And in this vein, the Kingdom of the Netherlands is co-facilitator for this year's resolution on the intensification of efforts to prevent and eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls, together with France, who is the pen holder this year. Women and girls in all their diversity, including LGBTIQ+ individuals, have a right to participate in sports, free from discrimination, intimidation, and violence. The Kingdom is concerned by the violence that women and girls face because of their sporting endeavors, including online. Women and girls who do not meet the physical stereotype of a woman are often degradingly referred to as she-male, and men masquerading as women. To address toxic masculinity, it is crucial that men and boys interact with women and girls as their peers and equals. Can the Special Rapporteur reflect on the exclusion of women from non-segregated sporting events following the success of women in those sports and its role in maintaining gender stereotypes? Thank you.
Thank you, Netherlands. United States, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Madam Special Rapporteur, your report correctly notes that sports are a valuable source of physical and mental well-being, and that women and girls face very real and serious challenges, such as violence, harassment, and discrimination. We agree with many recommendations on these points. Your report appropriately says that all persons, irrespective of their gender identity, are entitled to live a life free from discrimination. Unfortunately, in that very same report, you erroneously conflate transgender persons with intersex persons or others with naturally occurring variations in sex characteristics and use demeaning language to refer to transgender persons. Your report also notes that women and girls are disproportionately subjected to hostile threats and harassment in virtual spaces. We share this concern and are deeply troubled by the spread of online harassment, abuse, and gender disinformation that over 85% of women and girls have faced online. That is why we were dismayed during the Olympics to see you engage in similar behavior, spreading false and harmful information about the gender of Algerian boxer Iman Khalif. We take pride in our American women athletes who stand for equality and safety in sports, like the brave USA Gymnastics athletes who spoke out about the abuse they experienced from their team doctor, like 11-time Olympic medalist Simone Biles, who shed a light on the importance of taking care of one's mental health, And like Olympic and activist Megan Rapinoe, who fought for equal pay for women U.S. soccer players and has been a powerful advocate for the inclusion of all women and girls in sports, as we will continue to do. I thank you.
Thank you, United States. Russian Federation, you have the floor, followed by Brazil and Czechia.
Госпожа председатель, в рамках сегодняшней встречи позвольте прокомментировать отдельные вопросы деятельности Комитета по ликвидации дискриминации в отношении женщин за последние 2 года. Прежде всего, внимание привлекает продолжающийся процесс разработки так называемых замечаний общего порядка. В настоящее время ведется работа по согласованию замечаний общего порядка 40 о равной инклюзивной представленности женщин в системе принятия решений и 41 по гендерным стереотипам. В очередной раз призываем членов комитета четко соблюдать положения Конвенции и осуществлять свои функции строго в рамках пункта 9 резолюции Генеральной Ассамблеи ООН 68-268 «Укрепление и повышение эффективности функционирования системы договорных органов по правам человека», в соответствии с которым деятельность конвенциональных органов должна вестись, цитирую, в рамках соответствующих мандатов и быть созвучна с положениями соответствующих договоров, и тем самым не создавать новых обязательств для государств-участников. Считаем замечание общего порядка частным мнением экспертов комитета, которые не могут налагать на государство какие-либо обязательства в дополнение к тем, которые они взяли на себя при присоединении к соответствующему международному договору. Госпожа председатель, ознакомились с содержанием доклада госпожи Алsalem, в котором рассматриваются различные формы и причины и последствия насилия в отношении женщин и девочек в спорте. Обратили внимание на оценку специальным докладчиком допуска трансгендеров к женским соревнованиям. Разделяем точку зрения о том, что в женских спортивных мероприятиях должны участвовать исключительно женщины. В ином случае мы сталкиваемся с вопиющим фактом нарушения прав женщин-спортсменок, ведь трансгендеры в силу своих физических особенностей имеют над женщинами преимущество. Надеемся, что причастные к спорту чиновники и спортивные федерации прислушаются к рекомендациям специального докладчика. Госпожа председатель, в то же время вызывают сожаление попытки спецдокладчика навязать государствам спорную, несогласованную в межправительственном формате концепцию сексуальной ориентации и гендерной идентичности. Кроме того, призываем госпожу Алsalem использовать вместо словосочетания «гендерно мотивированное насилие» всеобъемлющую формулировку «насилие в отношении женщин». Благодарю за внимание.
Thank you, Russia. Brazil, you have the floor.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I would like to thank for the reports presented here today. The realization that the CEDAW Convention is one of the treaties most subjected to reservations and lack of implementation is of great concern to us. The proportions reached by the backlash against gender equality are disturbing. We are especially concerned by the law on the promotion of virtue and the prevention of vice enacted by the de facto regime of Taliban in August 24. And I would also like to point out that since the Taliban took power in 21, our country has welcomed a number of Afghan female judges based on a provision of the first edition of the Brazilian National Action Plan for Women, Peace, and Security. In this context, Brazil recommits to the universality of the human rights of women and girls in all their diversity. As for the report on violence against women and girls in sports, in our perspective, it fails to adequately assess the real challenges, exclusions, and violence faced by transgender women in various contexts, including sports. We urge the Special Rapporteur to ensure that her voice as a UN expert does not inadvertently contribute to further discrimination against transgender women. Conforming to its foreign policy, Brazil promotes a domestic agenda of equal pay and redistribution of care work, fight against gender-based violence, femicide, and misogyny, and a gender perspective of climate justice. Under the G20 Brazilian presidency, these agendas are at the heart of the G20 Empowerment of Women Working Group. Brazil strongly advocates for gender equality and urges the international community to pursue SDG 5 and repel the escalation of gender backlash that exclude and discriminate half of the world's population. I thank you.
I thank Brazil. Czechia, you have the floor, followed by Philippines and Japan.
Thank you, Chair. We thank the Chair of the Working Group for presenting the latest report. we share your concern that the backlash against women's and girls' human rights has reached extreme proportions in some parts of the world. Madam Nirin-Kindi, the presented report talks about gender apartheid, which merits an unequivocal response. Could you please outline concrete steps that the working group has in mind, also in connection with your recommendation to include gender apartheid as a crime against humanity? Czechia is committed to removing historical, social, cultural, religious, and ideological obstacles to gender equality in order to ensure a life of dignity for all without any distinction. Respect for human dignity and human rights contributes to international security, prevents conflicts, and reduces the emergence of international threats. Let me also stress that respect for human dignity is an essential factor for prosperity and growth, not to mention sustainable development. Czechia is currently in the process of reviewing the existing national gender equality strategy for this decade, as well as drafting the third National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. We are determined to continue our homework in order to achieve substantive gender equality, and we thank the working group for all its work. Thank you.
Czechia, thank you. Philippines, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Philippines thanks the Chair of Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women and the Chair of the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls, respectively, as well as the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, its causes and consequences, for the reports they presented. My question is for the Special Rapporteur, Ms. Reem Alsalem. What role can international mechanisms play in addressing the rise of online violence against women in sports? And based on your consultations, what strategies have been proven effective in overcoming cultural norms that discourage women and girls from participating in sports or reporting abuse? In the Philippines, we have taken steps to address both online and offline violence against women in sports. Our Magna Carta of Women guarantees equal participation in sports and the elimination of gender-based discrimination, ensuring women and girls have access to development programs, scholarships, and trainings. Additionally, our Safe Spaces Act of 2018 recognizes that both men and women must have equality, security, and safety not only in private but also on the streets, public spaces, online, workplaces, and educational and training institutions. It criminalizes gender-based sexual harassment in public and online settings, effectively expanding the protection covered by the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act, which criminalized acts when persons in authority demand, request, or require sexual favors from subordinates regardless if these demands, requests, or requirements are accepted. While this has strengthened our capacity to address the issue, challenges such as underfunding and persistent cultural norms remain, which undermine their opportunities and potential. By sharing strategies and best practices and adopting victim or survivor-centered approaches, we can create a safer, more inclusive environments for women and girls in sports. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Philippines. Japan, you have the floor, followed by Mexico and Ukraine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank all of the briefers for the informative presentations and updates, which are all critical to the discussion of the agenda advancement of women. Given the time constraints, I'd like to focus on my interaction with Ms. Nirin-Kindi and Ms. Alsalem. First, I'd like to thank Special Rapporteur Alsalem for her latest report. Sports can be a valuable avenue for promoting an inclusive society in which all people can respect each other's human rights and dignity. In this regard, Japan believes that all people should be given the fair opportunity to participate in sports. Second, I'd like to express my appreciation to the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls for its very alarming analysis and report on escalating backlash against gender equality. The report points out that some countries face obstacles in adopting, regulating, and disseminating laws to advance gender equality, as well as gaps in both the adoption and the implementation of relevant public policies, including due to the non-allocation of the necessary funds. Could you kindly share any good examples of national efforts in maintaining or increasing funds and key factors that made it possible? Thank you.
Thank you, Japan. Mexico, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. Centraré mi intervención en la presentación del informe del Comité de la CEDAW y en el de la Relatora Especial sobre la Violencia contra las Mujeres y las Niñas. Habiendo destacado lo anterior, en nombre de México, quiero comenzar por expresar mi reconocimiento al trabajo que ha realizado el Comité. En particular, nos parece de suma importancia la elaboración de la Recomendación General 40 sobre la participación de las mujeres en la toma de decisiones que se adoptará este mes. Entusiasma a México el enfoque sobre políticas exteriores feministas, las cuales son instrumentos vitales para lograr una igualdad sustantiva. Asimismo, celebramos que las actividades realizadas por la CEDAW incorporen a distintos actores interesados. En ese tenor, mi país desea saber cómo el Comité tiene previsto colaborar con otros actores y procedimientos regionales para aprovechar la relevancia del 30º aniversario de la Declaración y la Plataforma de Acción de Beijing y sumar esfuerzos hacia la igualdad de género. En cuanto al informe sobre la violencia contra las mujeres y las niñas en el deporte, México coincide en la necesidad de enfoques integrales que aborden múltiples dimensiones de la violencia y la interseccionalidad, sin olvidar que las mujeres son diversas. En ese sentido, México desea preguntar a la relatora, ¿cuáles considera que son los principales desafíos para garantizar que los deportes se conviertan en espacios seguros para mujeres y niñas, en particular para aquellas personas de diversidad sexual? ¿Y cómo pueden los estados y organizaciones deportivas erradicar las barreras que enfrentan las mujeres y las niñas para denunciar la violencia? Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mexico. Ukraine, you have the floor, followed by United Kingdom and Greece.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. Ukraine, we are grateful to all the special rapporteurs for presenting their reports. And Ukraine acknowledged the urgency and gravity of the issue at hand, and especially with the harrowing context of Russia's ongoing war against my country, Ukraine. As Russia's brutal full-scale invasion of Ukraine enters its third year, it continues to take a devastating toll on Ukrainian women and girls. Let me just remind you the latest data. According to the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, since February 2022, the aggressor state has killed at least 3,283 women and 261 girls, and injured 5,345 women and injured 479 girls. The UN Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine found that in 2023, girls and women aged from 15 to 83 became victims of war crimes such as rape and sexual violence committed by the Russian occupying forces. Ukrainian prosecutors have documented 303 cases of conflict-related sexual violence, with 189 victims being women and 15 girls. These atrocities are not just numbers, they represent real lives torn apart by unimaginable cruelty. The Russian occupying forces are wielding sexual violence as a barbaric method of warfare on the unprecedented scale, aiming to terrorize, take revenge, and punish both civilians and Ukrainian prisoners of war. Over the past 2 years, Russian invasion has caused one of the largest displacement crises, affecting in total more than 19 million people, the majority of whom are women and children. Ukraine is profoundly grateful to all those countries who have opened their homes and hearts to the Ukrainian people fleeing from Russian atrocities. Global solidarity is imperative in the face of such abhorrent crimes. Justice for victims calls for our relentless commitment and immediate intervention. My question is to the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls. What member states and international mechanisms, both governmental and non-governmental, could do better to address such crimes, to continue meticulously monitor and document every case of violence against women and girls, with the resolute aim to bring in those responsible to justice? I thank you.
I thank you, Ukraine. United Kingdom, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The United Kingdom thanks the briefers for their presentations on these important topics. These reports are, unfortunately, even more important in the face of increasing attempts globally to roll back or undermine the rights of women and girls. The report on violence against women and girls rightly highlights that women and girls continue to face disproportionate barriers to their safe and equal participation in sport. The United Kingdom recognizes the vital role sport plays in empowering women and girls, building confidence, enhancing leadership skills, and promoting physical and mental well-being. It is therefore essential that states support the important work of individual sporting bodies to combat gender stereotypes, violence, and harassment, ensuring that all women and girls can enjoy the benefits of full and equal participation in sport. Chair, everyone deserves dignity and respect, without fear of violence and persecution, including those who are transgender or gender diverse. The United Kingdom looks forward to continuing to stand alongside partners to defend the human rights and freedoms of women and girls in all their diversity. Thank you.
Thank you. United Kingdom, Greece, you have the floor, followed by Romania and Canada.
Thank you, Chair. Since this is the first time I'm taking the floor, I would like to congratulate the Bureau for your election. I would also like to thank all three briefers for their remarks and underline Greece's support to their mandate. Greece aligns itself with the statement to be delivered by the European Union, and in addition would like to address the chair of the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women in its national capacity. Madam Chair, please allow me to thank you for your important work and reiterate the commitment of the Greek government to the full implementation of the CEDAW Convention and the legal obligations arising therefrom, taking also into consideration the fact that in February 2024, Greece presented its relevant periodic report to the committee. Madam Chair, the UN Secretary General, addressing the General Assembly during the High-Level Week, referred to global inequality, including gender equality, as a major driver for unsustainability, echoing therefore growing concerns regarding the current backlash against women's and girls' rights in many parts of the world. How do you think this negative trend will affect the effective implementation of the CEDAW Convention by states and the protection that it provides to women and girls? Moreover, how can the CEDAW framework itself safeguard the meaningful protection of women and girls in all their diversity from this regression? I thank you.
I thank you, Greece. Romania, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Special Rapporteur Alsalem, we would like to express our appreciation for your comprehensive report on violence against women and girls in sports. In Chapter 6 on the effective participation of women and girls in sport, the focus is on a number of structural obstacles that still prevent women and girls from effectively participating in amateur and professional sports. Significant obstacles include the absence of role models, cultural taboos, and poor infrastructure, especially in rural and vulnerable communities. Furthermore, there are also significant data gaps and the need for additional intersectional analysis to guide the development of policies that deal with these problems. Madam Rapporteur, could you provide more details on particular tactics or industry best practices that have been used to successfully gather this data and create a relevant database? Moreover, how can member states guarantee that women and girls are adequately consulted in the formulation of sports policies, especially concerning matters such as access to leadership positions, sex-segregated sports, and violence prevention? Thank you.
I thank Romania. Canada, you have the floor, followed by Cuba and Malaysia.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Le Canada remercie les oratrices pour leur présentation. Nous convenons qu'il est nécessaire d'intensifier les efforts à l'échelle mondiale pour contrer la montée des réactions négatives à l'égard de l'égalité des genres et qu'il est urgent de réaffirmer l'égalité réelle. Nous vous remercions pour vos recommandations des mesures à prendre pour promouvoir l'égalité des genres à l'aube du 30e anniversaire de Beijing et nous attendons avec impatience la présentation et le dialogue sur notre dernier rapport avec le comité la semaine prochaine. Canada firmly believes that any discussions on violence against women and girls in sport is a very important issue. and must be inclusive of all women, including trans women and girls who experience violence and discrimination based on their gender identity and expression. In this regard, Canada has supported the development of the Universal Code of Conduct to prevent and address maltreatment in sports, which defines prohibited behaviors, including psychological, physical, and sexual mistreatment, and advance a respectful sport culture that delivers quality, inclusive, and welcoming sport experience. We also fund an independent complaint mechanism to administer the code. We will continue to stand with our partners to prevent and address gender-based violence in sport. In this context of sports for all, hearing the comments that were made in the room today, how do we advance dialogue amongst member states with differing views to advance our work collectively when it comes to reconciling safety, fairness, and inclusion in sport and the respect of human rights? Thank you.
I thank Canada. Cuba, you have the floor.
Señora Presidenta, agradecemos la presentación realizada por la Presidenta del Comité sobre la Eliminación de la Discriminación contra la Mujer, Ana Peláez, la Presidenta del Grupo de Trabajo sobre Discriminación contra Mujeres y Niñas, Laura Yirinkindi, y la Directora Especial y la Relatora Especial sobre la Violencia contra Mujeres y Niñas, sus causas y consecuencias, Reem Alsalem. Cuba está firmemente comprometida con la eliminación de la discriminación en todas sus manifestaciones, incluidas aquellas ejercidas contra mujeres y niñas que atenta directamente contra los postulados de la CEDAW y la Declaración y Programa de Acción de Beijing. Reiteramos nuestro apoyo y reconocimiento al Comité sobre la Eliminación de la Discriminación contra la Mujer por su notable contribución en favor de los derechos de las mujeres y las niñas. Cuba asume con absoluta seriedad las obligaciones derivadas de la Convención. Presentaremos durante este mes de octubre nuestro 9º informe periódico ante el CEDAW, momento que servirá para evaluar los resultados del país en esta materia y analizar los retos que enfrentamos para continuar avanzando en la lucha contra la discriminación hacia la mujer y en favor de su plena igualdad y empoderamiento. Estamos orgullosos del papel decisivo que desempeña la mujer en la realidad cubana. Es ilustrativo que sean mujeres quienes ocupen la mayoría de los cargos decisorios en el país y escaño en el Parlamento. Aún así, los avances experimentados en el plano nacional se han visto obstaculizados por el impacto negativo que tiene sobre nuestra sociedad y la economía el injusto bloqueo económico, comercial y financiero impuestos por Estados Unidos. Señora Presidenta, agradecemos a la Relatora Especial sobre la Violencia contra las Mujeres y Niñas, sus causas y consecuencias, la presentación del informe A79-325, del que tomamos nota al tiempo que reiteramos nuestro apoyo a su mandato. Cuba continúa dando pasos para erradicar completamente la violencia y discriminación contra mujeres y niñas. Desde el Estado y el Gobierno se han promovido iniciativas dirigidas en esa dirección. En el 2021 se adoptó el Programa Nacional para el Adelanto de las Mujeres, que constituye la agenda del Estado para el desarrollo de políticas a favor de las mujeres y la igualdad de género en el país. También se aprobó la Estrategia Integral de Prevención y Atención a la Violencia de Género y en el escenario familiar. En junio de 2023 se puso en marcha el Observatorio sobre Igualdad de Género para fortalecer este enfoque en la construcción de indicadores y realizar análisis más integrales en materia de empoderamiento de las mujeres. Estas iniciativas se suman a las amplias garantías que la Constitución de la República y el Código de la Familia ofrece a las mujeres y niñas. Dado que el informe A79-325 se centra en la violencia contra mujeres y niñas en los deportes, agradeceríamos conocer los criterios de la Relatora Especial sobre el impacto de las medidas coercitivas unilaterales en el pleno goce del deporte.
I thank Cuba, Malaysia, you have the floor, followed by Luxembourg and Liberia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At the outset, Malaysia thanks the Chair of the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, the Chair of the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls, and the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, its causes and consequences for their presentations to the committee. Madam Chair, Over the years, Malaysia has made significant strides and efforts toward advancing gender equality and safeguarding the human rights of women and girls. Malaysia has implemented manifold policies to empower women, ensuring equal access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunities. However, our journey is far from complete. It is vital that we work together, communities, organizations, and governments, to dismantle the barriers that prevent women and girls from realizing their full potential. We must work together to create a world where women and girls can thrive, free from violence, discrimination, and inequality. Madam Chair, our question is to Madam Special Rapporteur, Reem Alsalem. You have noted in your report on the importance of preserving the integrity of female-only sports, including female-only spaces. How can erosion of spaces for women and girls, both in law and practice, contribute to violence, discrimination, and other human rights violations? I thank you.
I thank Malaysia. Luxembourg, you have the floor.
Madame la vice-présidente, le Luxembourg souscrit à la déclaration de l'Union européenne et souhaite ajouter les éléments suivants dans ses capacités nationales. Nous tenons à remercier tous les intervenants de ce briefing combiné. Leurs présentations ont montré une fois de plus que nous devons redoubler nos efforts pour garantir l'égalité des genres et pour lutter contre la discrimination fondée sur le genre dans tous les domaines. Notre question se dirige plus particulièrement à la rapporteure spéciale. Madame la rapporteure spéciale, nous souhaitons réitérer notre plein soutien à votre mandat et vous remercions pour le choix du sujet de votre rapport. La violence fondée sur le genre dans les sports est un sujet très actuel qui ne reçoit pas assez d'attention. Trop souvent, les femmes et les filles, dans toute leur diversité, font face à des discriminations, y inclut des violences fondées sur le genre, ce qui les empêche de participer pleinement à des activités sportives et de réaliser leurs droits humains. Pour cette raison, nous saluons le fait que pendant cette session, 2 rapports sur le droit de participer à des activités sportives seront présentés à la 3e commission, ce qui nous permettra d'avoir une analyse compréhensive de ce sujet. Nous notons également le nombre de contributions que vous avez reçues pour votre rapport, y inclus de la société civile. Pouvez-vous nous donner davantage d'informations sur vos consultations avec la société civile? Avez-vous reçu des contributions que vous avez choisi de ne pas inclure dans votre rapport? Nous vous remercions.
I thank Luxembourg. Liberia, you have the floor, followed by Ireland and Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My delegation would like to thank the 3 presenters for the splendid presentation. Liberia Ministry of Gender, Child and Social Protection has made progress towards the advancement of women and girls, especially women and girls in sports. The Ministry of Gender, Child and Social Protection is a statutory institution of Liberia that deals with matters affecting women and girls, children, and other matters on social protection. The government of Liberia has made significant progress in making sure that gender-responsive budgeting and planning is upheld at the Ministry of Finance, Development Planning for inclusive development and planning for the advancement of women and girls. Liberia has the National Plan for Women in Peace and Security that supports women and girls' safety, physical and mental health, empowerment, and participation at all levels in society to ensure sustainability and inclusiveness towards peace and security. The Ministry of Gender is in cooperation with civil society organizations that advocate for women and girls' advancement, and the United Nations Women in Liberia to solve gender equality and women advancement issues. The government of Liberia is committed to advancing and protecting women and girls, children, and vulnerable groups in society. Its mission is to empower women for participation in national economic, social, and political life. Some steps that the government of Liberia has taken towards the advancement of women and girls include periodic comprehensive analysis to address gaps across all sectors and ensure that policies and planned programs for gender responsiveness is effected. Creation of gender social units across all government sector, promote women rights and civil society organization advocates, encourage women political participation and leadership throughout and educational empowerment, cater to sexual reproductive health issues, intensify the fight against discrimination and stereotypes, and legislate laws that mainstream gender priorities at both national and subnational levels. I thank you.
I thank Liberia. Ireland, you have the floor.
Distinguished Chair. Ireland aligns with the statement of the EU and thanks the presenters, each of you, for highlighting the urgent need to advance gender equality meaningfully. We'd like to start with a question directed to the Chair of the Working Group. How can we best engage men and boys as allies in countering the backlash you spoke of against gender equality? Chair, gender equality is a fundamental human right and a necessary condition for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. The Working Group has clearly articulated the features of the backlash against gender equality, which includes growing opposition to sexual and reproductive health and rights. Women and girls, in all their diversity, should be able to decide freely over their bodies and how, when and if to have children. They should have access to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health and to the education and protection to live a life free from sexual and gender-based violence. This includes equitable access to affordable, appropriate and high-quality health services. Ireland urges all states to provide these services and protect these existing rights. Ireland also supports the rights of women and girls not to face discrimination or exclusion based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. Ireland recognises that civil society and human rights defenders play an essential role in progressing gender equality. Stepping up our support for and engagement with women's rights organisations and feminist movements is essential if we are to fulfil our shared commitment to universal human rights and to leaving no one behind. Thank you.
I thank Ireland. Belgium, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Belgium aligns with the EU statement. Chair, almost 30 years ago, we committed ourselves in Beijing to take bold steps for gender equality. Progress was made, but we have to collectively admit that no country has achieved it fully. Worse, we are witnessing a rise in authoritarianism and multiple crises which disproportionately affect women's rights worldwide, while anti-gender movements are undermining achievements and stalling progress in the 12 key areas of the Beijing Platform of Action. Let us be clear, no tradition, religion, political ideology, cultural value or custom can ever justify gender discrimination or the denial of the human rights of women and girls in all their diversity. Now more than ever, we must step up our joint efforts to achieve gender equality, not only on paper, but by bringing about the social transformation necessary for this goal. This year, we also mark the 10th anniversary of the Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, the so-called Istanbul Convention. The Convention has a track record of enabling improved legislation, strengthened support services, and adequate training of professionals. It provides for the implementation of comprehensive and coordinated policies between national governmental bodies involved in prevention, prosecution, and protection. Gender-based violence requires such a holistic approach covering all domains, including sports. As there is a lot of debate and controversy around sexual orientation and gender identity in this context, both at amateur level as in top sports, which we witnessed again during the Paris Olympics, this topic merits our dedicated attention. But Belgium would like to stress the importance of not falling into the trap of opposing the human rights of individuals belonging to one group against those of another. Legitimate concerns should be able to be raised, while at the same time, stereotypes, generalizations, and transphobia should be avoided and addressed. Madame Nerinkindi, could you elaborate on how states, in full collaboration with civil society, can counter these politically motivated and ideology-based rollbacks, and what concrete actions can be taken to strengthen social movements working towards equal, inclusive, and just societies? Thank you.
I thank Belgium. Now I give the floor to India, followed by the European Union and Slovenia.
Madam Chair, allow me to express my delegation's gratitude for the briefing given on the topic of advancement of women. We take note of the report presented by the Special Rapporteur. However, we take a strong exception to the reference made against my country in the report. The Government of India has a zero-tolerance approach against sexual abuse and misconduct and has implemented strong legal frameworks to protect women and girls, including athletes, from such violations. The stringent provisions under the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act of 2013 ensure that any form of harassment or abuse is reported, investigated, and prosecuted, including in sports institutions. The Wrestling Federation of India has implemented significant reforms to enhance transparency and accountability, reflecting its commitment to athlete protection. An independent oversight committee and internal complaints mechanism have been established to ensure swift and impartial handling of concerns, particularly related to sexual harassment. Additionally, mandatory gender sensitization training for officials and athletes strengthens efforts to create a safer and more inclusive environment in Indian sports. India remains committed to promoting gender equality in sports, as evidenced by the increasing participation of women in various national and international competitions. I thank you.
I thank India, and I now give the floor to the European Union.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. We thank you for the important work carried out by the committee and the working group. CEDAW is a pivotal human rights instrument and a promoter and protector of gender equality globally. The EU reiterates its call on all states who have not yet done so to accede to the CEDAW Convention and to consider acceding to optional protocol. The EU calls on all states to ensure all women and girls full and equal enjoyment of all human rights in all respects and domains of society, and to combat and eliminate all forms of discrimination and sexual and gender-based violence. We would like to draw your attention to the situation in Afghanistan, where women and girls are systematically being deprived of their fundamental rights. We condemn this blatant discrimination, which could amount to the crime of gender persecution. We urge the Taliban to immediately remove all discriminatory policies and legislation directed against women and girls. Madam Chair, for the committee, the EU has the following question. What conclusions have you drawn for the reports by states under review during the past year in terms of priority actions that should be implemented to achieve gender equality? Madam Chair, we now turn our attention to the working group. The EU fully supports the mandate of the working group and its work to promote gender equality. We urge all states to fully cooperate with and support the efforts of the working group. The EU is a strong supporter of families, acknowledging that in different cultural, political and social systems, various forms of the family exist. Sexual and reproductive health is crucial for establishing supportive family structures. Madam Chair, in your latest report, the working group has stated that the pushback against gender equality often takes the form of promoting progress in one area, but involves a hidden cost or disproportionate burden on women and girls in another. The family narrative appears to be one such area. Could you elaborate on how inclusivity, sexual and reproductive health and education can benefit families as well as bring gender equality closer? We now turn to the Special Rapporteur. The European Union strongly supports your mandate. Despite significant progress in women's and girls' participation in sports, the sector remains one of the most gender unequal social institutions in modern society. Sexual and gender-based violence, including sexual harassment and abuse, in particular in coach-athlete relationships, remains rampant. Madam Special Rapporteur, what specific measures can international sports organizations take to increase women's representations in leadership roles? I thank you.
I thank European Union. Now I give the floor to Slovenia, followed by Cyprus and Nigeria.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Slovenia aligns with the EU statement and would like to make additional remarks in our national capacity in the dialogue with the Special Rapporteur. We thank the Special Rapporteur for her report and dedication to the efforts to eradicate violence against women and girls in sports. In the beginning of 2023, a survey was conducted in Slovenia on the different types of abuse that female athletes experience in sport before reaching adulthood. Results of the research revealed that 26% of female athletes experienced physical abuse, 21% emotional abuse, 11% sexual abuse, and 28% experienced neglect. These results reveal the extent of the need for a comprehensive approach to address violence in sports. It is therefore essential to formulate policies and measures aimed at prevention, ensuring the protection of women and girls in sports, as well as providing support services for victims or survivors. Madam Special Rapporteur, to what extent do you see the need to promote public debate in order to formulate comprehensive responses to the violence against women and girls in sports and to raise awareness among female athletes about their rights? I thank you.
I thank Slovenia. Now I give the floor to Cyprus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of Cyprus, I would like to thank all briefers for their reports and their presentation before us today. Cyprus aligns with the statement made by the European Union. Allow me to make some further comments in my national capacity. In the interest of time, allow me to contribute to our discussion, especially on the issue of violence against women and girls in sports. Elimination of violence against women and girls is a priority of my government, and in this regard, a priority of Cyprus' candidacy for Human Rights Council 2025-2027. Madam Special Rapporteur, the Me Too movement some years ago touched upon sports as well. It gave voice to many women as well as men that have been silenced for years, proving that despite the positive and indispensable role of sports for our societies, sports can also be a dark place for many. Unfortunately, women and girls around the world endure daily violence and discrimination simply due to their gender, and the field of sports is not an exception, with many women and girls facing gender-based discrimination, exclusion, and violence, including psychological and economic violence. It is a sine qua non not only to adopt legislations and national policies in relation to gender equality in sports, but mostly to address the structural barriers that prohibit the equal and effective participation of women and girls in sports. Allow me to touch upon some examples from our national experience. In 2023, the Parliament of the Republic of Cyprus proceeded with an amendment in the Cypriot sports law, eliminating any form of inequality in benefits for men and women representing Cyprus national teams. In practice, men and women of Cyprus national teams now receive the same daily allowance, travel compensation, remuneration for matches, and expenses for clothing, footwear, and food, ensuring that men and women enjoy the same working conditions. According to the amended legislation, the Cyprus Sports Organization has now the responsibility to ensure and promote gender equality in sports. Also, Cyprus' national strategy on gender equality in 2024-2026 has a standalone goal on gender in sports, aiming in the empowerment of women and girls and combating gender stereotypes in sports. Madam Special Rapporteur, we have an obligation to create safe and empowering environments that promote and advance the participation of women and girls in all spheres of life, including sports. Media have a crucial role to play in this regard. Nevertheless, it is a fact that women and girls are underreported by the media. Can we have your views in relation to the role of media, and how can media contribute in breaking stereotypes and the cycle of discrimination and violence, promoting an equal and fairly representation of women and girls in sports? I thank you.
Thank you, Cyprus. I give the floor to Nigeria, followed by Israel and Holy See.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thank the chairs and the special rapporteur and note the reports and briefings in efforts to end violence against women and girls. I am a daughter, an aunt, I am a woman, and a mother. Nigeria commends the exceptional and noble courage of Ms. Reem Alsalem for stepping up and stepping out into the uncharted waters of enlightening us on the misuse of the so-called progressive agenda to mask regressions and further engender violence against women and girls. We applaud and fully support her findings and recommendations that prostitution exposes women and girls to greater risk of violence and exploitation, as we also share her deep concerns about trafficking, prostitution, pornography, and the normalization of such acts as modern slavery and gross violence against women and girls. We support her call for the United Nations as the central platform for raising awareness on the plights of women and girls to arise from its age-old slumber and redirect action towards eradicating prostitution, sex work, trafficking in persons, and pornography, among other inhuman acts against women and girls. My question to you, Madam Special Rapporteur, are, with special note in your report to the fact that women and girls and girl migrants, among other vulnerable groups, are most impacted by this dehumanizing act, what would you say is the role of IOM and other relevant global, regional, and national migration bodies in ensuring the elimination of prostitution? And just for the benefit of any doubt, is there any way, form, or manner you think prostitution, sex work, and pornography could be dignifying to any woman or girl in whatever manner? And it could be a yes or no answer, if you may. Thank you.
I thank Nigeria. Dear colleagues, we're running late on time, and I would appreciate if the next speakers will voluntarily shorten their statements in order to give the presenters to answer your questions. Israel, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank the Chair of CEDAW for mentioning the alarming trend on conflict-related sexual violence and other issues that she mentioned. In the sphere of violence against women and girls, Israel welcomes the thematic focus on this year's annual report and reaffirms its unwavering commitment to ensure full, equal, and safe participation of all women and girls in sports. Israel strongly condemns all forms of gender-based and sex-based violence, including sexual harassment. No girl or woman should ever face discrimination in sports based on her sex, gender, sexual orientation, or sex characteristics. Israel is proud to be a safe and inclusive home for LGBTIQI women, including those who participate in sports. We take pride in the achievement of Israeli Olympian Raz Hershko, an LGBTQI+ athlete who recently won a silver medal in judo at the Olympic Games in France. We continue to call for the full inclusion of LGBTQI+ women at all levels in sports. Therefore, we are deeply concerned that the report promotes harmful narratives against transgender women in a way which not only stigmatizes trans women, but targets an already vulnerable group. Moreover, the report strays from its annual theme to unjustly target Israel, while making baseless allegations against Israel in the context of its war against Hamas. It has nothing to do with the important issue of violence against women and girls in sports. At the same time, the report only briefly and insubstantially mentions Afghanistan and Iran, where women and girls face serious violations of their human rights and fundamental freedoms, including in sports. The report also mentions a misrepresentation of a decision made by the ICJ, manipulating its findings. This statement is not found in any official court documentation. In fact, the president of the ICJ at the time clarified that this notion does not reflect the court's decision. Repeating a lie over and over again does not make it true. We are disappointed to say that this important mandate is being used to advance the political motives of the rapporteur, going beyond the thematic subject and mandate overall. I would like to ask the Special Rapporteur, if you claim to be a defender of the rights of women and girls, where is your voice in the call for the release of the hostages, including women, being held by a Hamas terror organization? Thank you.
I thank Israel. Now I give the floor to Holy See.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our briefers. The Holy See considers the recognition of the equal dignity of women as fundamental to a just society, and any failures in this regard, whether in law or in practice, are deeply troubling. It is vital that women and girls live in safety, free from violence, that they have what they need to thrive and do not live in poverty, and that they enjoy equal access to education and, for women, employment. In all of this, women must be respected and cherished as women, including for their unique gifts and capacities. In this regard, we are concerned that so much of this discussion has focused on the promotion of policies and programs, often asserted as rights without legal basis, which treat these very gifts and capacities as a liability and deny the embodied reality of womanhood.
We would like to thank the Special Rapporteur, Ms. Alsalem, for her recent reports on violence against women and girls in prostitution and sports, which highlight some unique vulnerabilities which women and girls face. Ms. Alsalem, in light of the discussion of your report on violence against women and girls in sports, and in light of the discussion which your report has generated, we would be interested to know if the Special Rapporteur has considered whether there may be a link between the erasure or denial of sexual difference in some areas, such as sports, and the increasing toleration of forms of exploitation which rely on those very differences, including prostitution, pornography, and surrogacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. Now I give the floor to Colombia, followed by Chile and Iceland.
Muchas gracias, distinguida presidenta. Agradecemos las presentaciones. Particularmente queremos referirnos a la presentación de la presidenta de la CEDAW en lo relativo al documento de posición sobre la violencia estructural en el marco de la regresión que evidenciamos frente a la protección de los derechos humanos de las mujeres. Es de nuestro interés conocer más sobre esta propuesta. Asimismo, para Colombia sigue siendo una prioridad la lucha contra la impunidad y la efectiva atención a las víctimas y sobrevivientes de hechos relacionados con la violencia sexual en conflictos armados. En esa medida, apoyamos el trabajo que el Comité realiza en este campo. Por otro lado, tomamos nota del informe de la Relatora Especial sobre la Violencia para las Mujeres y Niñas, sus causas y consecuencias, y el informe presentado para este ítem de agenda sobre adelanto de las mujeres. Especialmente, valoramos la visibilización de las múltiples formas de violencia, exclusión y discriminación que enfrentan las mujeres en el deporte. Coincidimos plenamente en el efecto catalizador que tiene el deporte para mejorar las condiciones de vida de las mujeres a nivel personal, físico y como medio de vida. Asimismo, con el alto impacto que la participación de todas las mujeres en el deporte tiene en la construcción de sociedades más justas y pacíficas. Como manifestación de todo lo anterior, Colombia está comprometida con la defensa de la protección de todos los derechos humanos de todas las personas y con la implementación de las herramientas que propendan por su goce efectivo. Esto incluye los derechos humanos de las mujeres, jóvenes, adolescentes y niñas en toda su diversidad. Es por esto que la imprecisión en el lenguaje es un elemento de preocupación para mi delegación, considerando que reproduce y refuerza estereotipos de género y normas sociales que están en la raíz de las violencias y de las múltiples e interseccionales formas de discriminación a las que son sometidas las mujeres en las diferentes esferas de la vida. El mínimo de responsabilidad que todos y todas ostentamos es no reproducir esos mecanismos, sino reforzar lógicas discriminatorias en el esfuerzo por visibilizar ciencias violencias. Los feminismos son de todas las mujeres. Gracias.
I thank Colombia. Chile, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Chile agradece a la relatora por examinar un tópico de relevancia como es la violencia y discriminación que experimentan las mujeres y niñas en el deporte. Respaldamos el mandato de la relatora y la importancia de garantizar la independencia en el desarrollo de sus labores. A su vez, expresamos nuestra inquietud por algunas referencias contenidas en su informe que resultan inadecuadas, como aquella que se refiere a los varones que se identifican como mujeres. Como un país comprometido con la protección de los derechos de las personas LGBTIQ+, consideramos fundamental que se reconozca que las mujeres trans son, en efecto, mujeres. Chile entiende que puede existir debates legítimos sobre la manera de garantizar una competencia justa y segura en aquellos deportes que permiten la participación de mujeres trans. Chile expresa su solidaridad con todos los deportistas que han sido víctimas de estas formas de violencia. Señora presidenta, el informe de la relatora es valioso en relevar tópicos como la prevalencia de la violencia sexual y económica en el deporte. Además, se refiere a la exclusión y discriminación que sufren mujeres y niñas en este ámbito. Es por ello que Chile fue uno de los países que remitió contribuciones para este estudio, relevando la importancia de avanzar en sanciones frente a casos de violencia, como también trabajar contra los estereotipos que persisten respecto de ciertos deportes donde mujeres y niñas se sienten excluidos. Invitamos a la relatora y a otros estados a seguir explorando estas materias y velar por los derechos de mujeres y niñas en toda su diversidad. Muchas gracias.
I thank Chile, and now I give the floor to Iceland, followed by Egypt and China.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Iceland thanks the two chairs and the Special Rapporteur for their interventions here today. The implementation of the CEDAW Convention is critical in the fight for full gender equality. Iceland agrees with the committee's chair that meaningful participation of women in peace processes and the implementation of WPS 1325 is of vital importance. By the end of this year, Iceland will adopt its 4th National Action Plan of the Security Council Resolution 1325 for the years 24 to 30, with 3 priority areas. First, a strong focus on advocacy and knowledge building at the international level. Second, the protection of women and girls in conflict zones, particularly by integrating gender perspectives into humanitarian work and the reception of refugees and asylum seekers. And finally, by domestically continuing to implement gender equality and gender perspectives in the work of civilian institutions. Madam Special Rapporteur, combating sexual and gender-based violence, sexual exploitation and abuse, and sexual harassment is a priority for Iceland and a focus area of our candidature to the Human Rights Council for term 25 to 27. The multiple forms of violence of women and girls in all their diversity faced in sports is of great concern. Women and girls in all their diversity, including LGBTQI+, trans women and girls, have the right to participate fully and equally in all areas of sports. They also have the right to be paid equally to men in sports. Unequal pay in sports contributes to sustained exclusion of women and girls in all their diversity from participation and progression in various areas of sports. Following the recent Olympic and Paralympic Games, and to mark the yearly International Equal Pay Day on September 18th, Iceland, together with OECD, hosted an event on towards pay equity in sports. It is vital that we achieve equal pay for genders in all their diversity in sports. Madam Special Rapporteur, can you share an example of best practices of specific measures implemented to ensure accountability for violations and discrimination against women and girls in all their diversity in sports, as well as concrete steps that states can take to accelerate equal pay for women and girls in all areas of sports? Thank you.
I thank Iceland. Egypt, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Madam Chairperson, my delegation thanks the presenters for the presentation of the reports, and my intervention is addressed to the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, Ms. Reem Alasalem. The elimination of all forms of violence against women and girls is paramount in the efforts to ensure the advancement of women and the empowerment of all women and girls. My delegation thanks the Special Rapporteur for her work and the reports presented to both the Human Rights Council as well as today in the General Assembly, which demonstrate the exercise of independence in the fulfillment of the mandate, as well as an exercise of the Special Rapporteur's freedom of expression and opinion, which is evidence-based and which also treads on uncharted territory, hopefully without fear from reprisal. My delegation supports the findings and recommendations of the report on violence against women in sports. The report has been able to bring us back to the basics underlying the global women's movement, particularly the creation of safe spaces for women to empower women and enable them to participate in public life, including in the world of sports. The erosion of that space has a direct link to the backlash on women's rights, including their enjoyment of the rights without discrimination and violence. Notwithstanding, my delegation does not agree with the introduction of the term economic violence, while taking note of the aspects elaborated in the report, defining it to be the infliction of economic harm on women athletes. On another note, my delegation does not recognize the term rights of transgender persons and would like to emphasize that human rights are universal, indivisible, and should be enjoyed and exercised without discrimination, including on the basis of sex. However, we take note of the argument put forward by the Special Rapporteur on how to ensure the safety of women from violence in sports in the context of countries which have jeopardized this safety and the integrity of sports by allowing mixed biological sex sport competitions. Finally, we would be remiss if we do not highlight the most atrocious form of violence against women and girls represented in the egregious, indiscriminate aggression by Israel against civilians in Gaza, the West Bank, and now in Lebanon, the majority of the victims of which are women and girls, in addition to the systemic Israeli violation of Palestinian women's rights and the violence perpetrated against female Palestinians under occupation, including sexual violence, especially in places where they are arbitrarily detained. I thank you.
I thank Egypt. China, you have the floor, followed by South Africa and Estonia.
谢谢主席。中方赞赏联合国 消除对妇女歧视委员会和有关特别机制在消除对妇女一切形式歧视、维护妇女权益领域发挥的重要作用。支持你们继续同各国开展建设性对话，推动全球妇女事业再上新台阶。作为消夫旗公约缔约国，中国切实履行公约义务，于去年5月就第9次公约履约报告接受委员会审议，以坦诚开放的态度与委员会进行富有成效的对话。今年6月，中方候选人穆红女士成功当选2025至2028年度消夫旗委员会委员。中方将支持穆红女士积极履行委员会职责，对消除对妇女的偏见和歧视贡献更多力量。中国以妇女权益保障法为主体，建立了包括100多部法律法规在内的保障妇女权益的法律体系，坚持实施促进妇女全面发展的国家行动计划，保障妇女在健康、教育、就业、社会保障、婚姻家庭等方面的合法权益，帮助妇女平等参与经济社会发展，平等享有改革发展成果。中方将认真对待委员会提出的建设性建议，积极采取切实行动，继续推动落实北京宣言和行动纲领，消除对妇女一切形式的偏见和歧视，让妇女平等真正成为全社会共同遵循的行为规范和价值标准。谢谢。
Thank you, China. South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. At the outset, South Africa wishes to express its gratitude to the briefers and the committees for their updates and the continued work they do on this critical topic. I wish to first consider the report of the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, in particular, elements on the effective coordination and the working group on discrimination with the working group on discrimination against women and girls, and the important work being undertaken on gender self-identification. It is hoped this effort will create pathways for constructive engagement toward addressing discrimination and the protection of the inherent and universal human rights of all people, regardless of their sexual orientation and gender identity. We also look forward to your general comment on gender stereotype. And we wish to address the Chair and ask about the identification of topics and themes for engagement with other mandate holders, such as the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, who determines that topic. The Working Group report on discrimination against women and girls is also equally appreciated, especially its content on the backlash and regression on gender equality. Madam Chair, I wish to focus on the report of the Special Rapporteur. We read your account with deep reflection and concern. You have undertaken productive research that has highlighted the entrenched patriarchy that exists within sport. We wholeheartedly agree with your initial sentiment that sports are important avenues for creating social change as they enable women and girls to challenge gender norms and stereotypes. The report exposes a toxic culture in sport that encourages a negative environment and is a fertile ground for various forms of violence against women and girls. We have genuine apprehension about the potential for sexual predators to operate undetected in sporting codes, as well as the very worrying potential for such persons to groom children, especially girls. We also recognize the destructive culture within sport that perpetuates gender inequality and objectifies women, especially with women athletes. This report should rightly consider actions towards undoing the patriarchy and barriers in sports structures that perpetuate gender discrimination. Unfortunately, the report also enters conversations about transgender athletes, as well as those with differences in sexual development, through the lens of fairness in sport, but the connection to violence against women and girls remains unclear. This is given disproportionate attention in the report and only serves to distract from the real issues highlighted in the report. We wish to further highlight that the turn on the topic does not expect a beneficial engagement on the to encourage understanding, which is necessary on polarizing social issues. Rather, we are concerned that the nature of the commentary and recommendations are counterintuitive and in fact contrary to HRC resolutions. In particular, that on women and girls in sport that discourages the use of unnecessary and humiliating harmful medical procedures, as well as the resolution on combating discrimination, violence and harmful practice against intersex persons.
Thank you, South Africa. Estonia, you have the floor, followed by Algeria and Iran.
Chair, Chair, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Nordic and Baltic countries. We would like to welcome the Special Rapporteur, Honorable Reem Alsalem, in the third committee and reaffirm our support for her mandate. The Nordic and Baltic countries strongly condemn all forms of violence against all women and girls, including sexual and gender-based violence and violence based on sexual orientation and gender identity. We remain deeply concerned about the deteriorating situation of women and girls across the globe, including LGBTQ+ persons, aggravated by wars, armed conflicts, various crises, climate change, and other factors. As committed members of a group of Friends for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls, we underline the critical importance of involving men and boys in achieving gender equality and countering violence against women and girls. States have the obligation to ensure that women and girls can enjoy a life free from violence. Honorable Rapporteur, could you please further elaborate on the best practices you have seen working during your mandate in better involving men and boys in countering violence against women and girls? I thank you.
I thank Estonia. Algeria, you have the floor.
المقررة الخاصة على تقريرها الذي سلط الضوء على ظاهرة العنف في مجال التمييز ضد النساء في مجال الرياضة. لقد تمت في إشارة ضمنية في تقريركم وبالإضافة إلى مداخلات وفود بطريقة مباشرة وضمنية من القاعة إلى رياضية جزائرية حائزة على الميدالية الذهبية في أولمبياد باريس في اختصاص الملاكمة على أنها ليست فتاة. نؤكد على أن الرياضية الجزائرية إيمان خليف ولدت وعاشت أنثى ولا يوجد أدنى شك حول ذلك. نكتفي بإحالة الجميع إلى اللجنة الأولمبية الدولية نفسها والتي بكامل الوضوح وبشهادتها أكدت أن الأخبار المغلوطة بشأن الرياضية الجزائرية عارية من الصحة. إن الحملة الشرسة التي تعرضت لها الرياضية الجزائرية التي تمثل بكل فخر المرأة الجزائرية ما هو إلا مثال حي على ما تعانيه النساء من تمييز في المجال الرياضي، وعليه فإننا ننادي إلى ضرورة تكثيف الجهود للقضاء على العنف والتمييز ضد النساء في كافة المجالات وخاصة في المجال الرياضي. شكراً سيدة رئيسة.
I thank Algeria. Iran, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My delegation thanks the panelists for the briefings. Iran attaches great importance to any efforts to fight against any forms of violence and discrimination against women and girls. With that, we wish to take this opportunity to share our views on some contents included in the reports presented today. On the term gender apartheid, which is widely used and defined in the report of the working group on discrimination against women, my delegation is of the view that using this controversial concept is a deliberate effort to undermine the internationally recognized understanding of apartheid as a racial segregation and discrimination against non-white people and white supremacy. We believe that adding a gender dimension to the term apartheid is divisive and can further lead to polarization of the discussion over the situation of apartheid. In this context, the term gender apartheid can be used in reference to atrocities committed by the Israeli regime against women and girls in Palestine for over 7 decades, which are historical, systematic, brutal, vivid, and persistent. Of course, we maintain that Israeli laws, policies, and practices in the occupied Palestinian territories amount to apartheid, and on Palestinian women and girls amount to gender apartheid. We leave it to the wisdom of the room to think about the humorous points raised by the representative of the Israeli regime. And we want to address the report of the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women. We also share the same view and vision that the sport empowers women and girls, builds their self-confidence and physical mental well-being, and unlocks their full potential, leading to healthier and more resilient societies. We support the report of a Special Rapporteur in part, which addresses the importance of protecting the integrity of female sports, including female-only spaces such as shower and locker room, and the threats that the country poses to the safety of women and girls. This protection is necessary to ensure that all women and girls are able to participate in sports through an inclusive and safe environment for women and girls to excel in sports. I thank you.
I think we have completed the list where the speaker list was closed. So now I will invite the presenters of the combined briefing to respond to the comments and questions from the floor. I first give the floor to the chair of the committee of CEDAW, Ms. Ana Peláez Narváez, who is joining us virtually.
Muchísimas gracias. ¿Me escucha bien? Espero que me escuche bien. Agradezco todos los comentarios y cuestiones que se han planteado al comité CEDAW. En relación con el mandato del comité, la cuestión que resaltaba la Federación Rusa, tengo que decir que el artículo 21, párrafo primero de la Convención, establece claramente que el comité podrá hacer recomendaciones de carácter general basadas en el examen de los informes y de los datos transmitidos por los Estados partes. Y esto es lo que hace el comité después de 45 años de la adopción de la Convención para la Eliminación de la Discriminación contra la Mujer cuando publica sus recomendaciones generales. Basándonos en eso, se hace una contextualización y se ofrecen orientaciones a los Estados. La recomendación general número 40 va a ser fundamental para sacar adelante esa paridad en la participación igualitaria y efectiva de las mujeres, por ejemplo, en los parlamentos, como comentaban algunos estados. Quiero resaltar aquí, poner en valor el gran trabajo realizado por la señora Nicola Melí como punto focal de esta recomendación, que realmente ha sido quien ha inspirado este trabajo de todo el comité en pro de ese 50-50% en la paridad. ¿Cómo alcanzar la paridad? Por tanto, lo encontrarán reflejado en esa recomendación general. Otra cuestión fue en relación con cómo afrontar también la colaboración con los mecanismos regionales. Yo creo que la plataforma EDVAU es un buen ejemplo que pone en valor esa cooperación que se tiene que establecer entre el CEDAW y otros organismos regionales. Por ejemplo, lo planteaba México y les puedo decir que gracias a la EDVAU existe una colaboración fortalecida entre el Comité CEDAW y el MESECBI, que es el organismo de seguimiento de la Convención de Belén do Pará. Y lo mismo existe con el gremio, con respecto al Convenio de Estambul y con respecto a otros mandatos especiales. ¿Cómo abordar la ciberviolencia? La ciberviolencia contra las mujeres y las niñas está recogida claramente en la Recomendación General número 35 del Comité CEDAW, en donde pueden encontrar ahí la base con la orientación clara para este tema. ¿Cómo afrontar el retroceso de los derechos de las mujeres? ¿Cómo realmente tomar medidas aquí? Algunas recomendaciones pueden ser garantizar que los recursos, que el Comité CEDAW cuente con los recursos suficientes para el propio mandato que tiene. Afrontar, por ejemplo, los retrasos que no solamente estamos asumiendo como consecuencia del COVID-19, sino también ahora como consecuencia de la crisis de liquidez de Naciones Unidas. Fortalecer también al Comité CEDAW como órgano para hacer la supervisión de la implementación de la Resolución 1325 y las subsiguientes del Consejo de Seguridad, o por ejemplo la propia ratificación del protocolo facultativo, que es fundamental. Además, apelo aquí a la obligación que tienen los Estados con respecto a dichos protocolos. Con respecto a las medidas prioritarias para promover la igualdad de los derechos de la mujer, la violencia contra las mujeres y la trata son cuestiones fundamentales. La salud y los derechos sexuales y reproductivos, el acceso efectivo a la justicia, el enjuiciamiento de todas las violaciones de estos derechos contra mujeres humanos, contra mujeres y niñas, es fundamental. Y para todo eso se necesita además esa participación igualitaria e inclusiva en todos los sistemas de toma de decisiones de las mujeres. Agradezco todas las referencias que se han hecho a la CEDAW como marco legislativo fundamental de obligado cumplimiento para 189 estados, que además entendemos que eso todavía se puede ampliar para llegar a la ratificación universal de este tratado fundamental para la igualdad efectiva de las mujeres en todas las esferas de la vida. Muchísimas gracias.
I thank you, Madam Chair. The interpreters kindly agreed to stay with us until 1:10. So now I will invite, I'll next give the floor to the Chair of the Working Group of Discrimination Against Women and Girls, Ms. Laura Miringindi. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and I thank all the representatives that took the floor for their responses to our report. I was asked a question about gender apartheid and what the working group has done. So the working group actually issued a guidance document this year that proposes terminology to be adopted in the draft treaty on crimes against humanity. And we believe, based on research and the opinions of legal scholars and experts on this issue, the gender apartheid leads to the same outcomes of discrimination and oppression and domination as racial and ethnic apartheid. So we have proposed an adaptation of racial discrimination under the Rome Statute, and it is on our website. In regard to AI and gender, this is something that will be the subject of more research and also issue a guidance document. The working group believes that it is important to pursue a gender-responsive approach in designing and implementing, as well as monitoring digital technologies, including AI, and looking at how data science should focus on bias detection in terms of gender, women and girls, and gender diversities. We will also be looking at the need to ensure inclusive and accessible technologies for women and girls that take into account their different experiences and accessibility, and also the need to develop educational programs that increase their participation of women and girls and also other marginalized groups in technology fields. I was also asked a question, I believe, about men as allies. The working group actually has issued a working document, a guidance document on this issue, on men's accountability for gender equality, and the working group reiterates the need for accountability of men for gender equality at the personal, institutional, and community level, looking at their roles and the practices in promoting or even leading to retrogressions in gender equality. And we focus on the need for male engagement, where the working group has called on men to also identify how masculinity and gender constructions and social constructions affect their privilege and affect women's rights, women and girls' rights. In terms of gender-responsive budgeting, the question that was asked, we do actually document as part of our mandate good practices, and this is one area where we have seen in a number of countries initiatives led by member states to develop laws or policies or tools on gender-responsive budgeting, and we see even parliamentary supervision in some countries, committees giving oversight to how the executive counterparts are implementing gender-responsive indicators. And the participation of civil society organizations in this is also a good practice that we flagged in our 2023 report on gendered inequalities of poverty. But the progress is not always linear, and because of resource constraints, this has not been sustainable in quite a few countries. In terms of public and political life, which is one of our 4 thematic areas, it is important to increase inclusive representation of women in parliament, and I think our CEDAW colleague explained their latest general recommendation is really key to achieving some of these aspirations. Some of the good practices that we have noted in member states arise really from the CEDAW provisions that require member states to modify social cultural patterns based on the superiority or inferiority of women. So it is important to have educational awareness and sensitization programs that drive information that can help to eliminate violence against women who want to stand for public office, the different types of embedded discrimination, sometimes through legislation, sometimes through financing initiatives. And we also noticed that in some countries, in some regions, the use of quotas as special temporary measures, again, as CEDAW requires, has resulted in a significant number of women joining the public office, but it's usually in the legislative space, not in the executive and judiciary. So this also gives us more work ahead of us. Lastly, I think there was an issue about how to address the anti-gender trends. You know, what are the initiatives that we need to keep in mind and reverse the backlash. We have proposed in many of our documents and in our strategies, but as well as advocacy, the need for, again, falling back on CEDAW provisions that call for member states to modify cultural patterns, social patterns that believe in the inferiority or superiority of one gender over another. And so through awareness raising and education, but also legislative backstopping to ensure that, you know, men and women and girls are equal and boys. We believe that it is important to reinforce commitments to international instruments, human rights treaties and conventions. So CEDAW, again, providing a really critical framework and encouraging states to ratify, but more than ratify, domesticate and implement them is a key part of the puzzle. Countering misinformation is really critical because sometimes it's important to actively combat misinformation and harmful narratives that undermine human rights through providing accurate information and fostering dialogue that promotes understanding of human rights as universal rights. I believe that is it, what I have here. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
I thank the chair of the working group, and now I will give the floor to the Special Rapporteur, Ms. Alsalem. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all the esteemed delegates for engaging on the report and also on my presentation, for many of you for supporting the findings and recommendations, and for those who also emphasize the need to respect the impartiality and independence of my mandate. With regards to the question from Luxembourg on consultation, I have welcomed input from diverse actors. And in the consultations, I have included persons and organizations with divergent views so that they can also speak to each other about the issues they disagree on. I've personally read and reflected on all submissions and taken them into consideration when assessing in an impartial and objective manner the input and using it for my analysis, which was and remains firmly rooted in human rights law. On online violence, and to respond to France and other delegates, in my report on prostitution and violence against women and girls, which, as you know, included references to pornography, which I consider to be filmed prostitution, I have made several recommendations about how to deal with pornography as a form of digitally facilitated violence. I would like to refer the delegate to that report, but I would say that whatever measures states undertake cannot rely exclusively on voluntary actions by these platforms and businesses that provide digital facilitated technology. And we have to see the violence that is perpetrated there for what it is, and those perpetrating it must be held accountable, and legislation must be adjusted in order to be able to do that. There were several questions about what must be done to improve participation of women and girls in sports. I would like to highlight some of these recommendations. Obviously, invest in sports for women and girls at all levels. Very importantly, address impunity for acts of violence committed. And to do that, also, we must help sports associations and bodies acquire the know-how and expertise on how to encourage reporting and provide better assistance and protection to victims. So that includes also disseminating clear protocols for reporting and addressing allegations of violence. And that can also include doing background checks on coaches and prohibiting the move of predatory coaches or those accused of violence between teams. A good practice on eliminating violence, I'd like to mention one from Spain, where to prevent individuals with sexual offenses from working with children, there is an obligation to provide the employer with a certificate of sexual offenses, which is requested from the Sexual Offenders Registry. Cuba asked me a question about sanctions. I recognize I did not address that specifically in the report. However, I did recommend the investment in the development of safe and accessible cities, communities, and spaces for women, and as improving the sports infrastructure by designating or establishing facilities that respond to the specific needs of women and girls. And of course, if that ability is hampered by sanctions, then we see that link very clearly. To the remarks made by the esteemed delegate from the US, I'm very glad that we agree on many conclusions and recommendations. As the US delegate knows, however, what I have included in my report mirrors the position that I have already expressed to the US with relations to releasing its final implementation regulations for Title IX, on the Education Amendment Act of 1972, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex in education programs. And at the time, I had expressed my concern about expanding the category of sex to include gender identity. I would therefore derive from that like to differ with the esteemed delegate of the US that I was using demeaning language by referring to males who identify as women exactly as that, since it is factually correct. Human rights language and principles must continue to be consistent with science and facts, including biological ones. And here, multiple studies have offered evidence that athletes born male have proven performance advantages in sports throughout their life, although this is most apparent after puberty. And in my report, I have advocated for the inclusive participation of everyone, irrespective of how they identify. At the same time, non-discrimination based on sex is recognized in all major international human rights agreements. And as I said elsewhere, in response to Malaysia, sex must be understood in its ordinary meaning to mean biological sex, and conflating sex and gender identity throughout the creation of a legal sex category has been confusing and problematic. It's not uncommon to have a tension of rights in human rights law, and part of our duty is to actually work through that tension of rights in order to minimize harm and ensure that the rights of everybody can be respected. And this is what I have done through calling for maintaining female-only categories in sport, while also open categories for persons who wish to participate, irrespective of how they identify. I would like to invite states, including the US, to center the rights of women and girls, including females who have spoken, rallied about the unfairness and loss of dignity when they lose female-only categories. Many of them have lost jobs, sponsorship opportunities, and have been harmed. I'm also dismayed that while championing the equal rights of transgender persons, there has been no concern expressed, as it is often the case, about the rights of women who identify as men or women who do not identify as women, meaning trans men. And this obviously has one clear reason, because we know that trans men do not have any biological advantages. However, the proposal that I have made, the recommendation I have made, guarantees the rights of women who do not identify as women to also participate in sport in safety, dignity, and fairness. For example, in the Paris Olympics, a woman who did not identify as a woman competed the 1,500-meter race in the female category, therefore maintaining her safety and dignity. I did not actually refer to the names of any athletes, whether in the Paris Olympics or otherwise. What happened at the Paris Olympics could have been avoided and can be avoided if in the future the IOC's inclusion guidelines recognize that there should be no discrimination based on sex and not only gender and sex variations. I will stop here. Thank you.
I thank the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls. I would like to especially thank our dear interpreters who stayed with us until now. And the committee will begin its general discussion of agenda item 27 in the afternoon, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.